Welcome everyone to Dialogue Doodles. I'm Jack, and today we're diving into a fascinating story that changed the course of human history. Imagine a time when a simple glass of milk could be deadly, when wine would mysteriously spoil, and when the cause of diseases was still a complete mystery. Joining me today is Dr. George Hamilton, a distinguished historian of science who has spent years studying the life and work of Louis Pasteur. Welcome to the show, George.
Thank you, Jack. It's great to be here, and I'm excited to share the remarkable story of Louis Pasteur, a man whose work quite literally touches all of our lives today.
George, before we dive into Pasteur's groundbreaking discoveries, I'm particularly intrigued by his early years. Here's a man who came from such humble beginnings. Can you paint us a picture of young Louis Pasteur?
Absolutely. Picture Dole, a small town in eastern France in 1822. Louis was born into a family of tanners. His father, Jean-Joseph, was a decorated sergeant major in Napoleon's army who had returned to the family trade. Despite their modest means, his parents recognized something special in young Louis.
I've heard he actually started out with quite different interests than science. Is that right?
Yes, that's one of the most fascinating aspects of his early life. At age 13, Pasteur was actually quite an accomplished artist, particularly known for his pastel portraits. He had this remarkable ability to capture precise details, a skill that would later prove invaluable in his scientific observations.
That's such an interesting connection. The attention to detail in art translating to scientific observation. How did he make the transition from art to science?
Well, it wasn't an immediate switch. His academic journey was actually quite progressive. He started at the local college in Arbois, where his early teachers noticed his sharp mind. But here's what's interesting. He wasn't immediately brilliant at everything. He was actually an average student in many subjects initially.
That's somewhat reassuring to hear. So what changed?
The turning point came during his preparation for the École Normale Supérieure entrance exams. He became absolutely devoted to his studies, particularly in chemistry. And his hard work paid off. He ranked fourth in the entrance examination, which was quite remarkable for someone from his background.
That must have opened up some significant opportunities for him.
Indeed it did. At École Normale, he caught the attention of some of France's leading scientists. But what's particularly interesting is how he balanced this academic success with his personal life. In 1849, he married Marie Laurent, who became not just his wife, but a crucial partner in his scientific work.
Tell us more about Marie's role. We often hear about great scientists, but their support systems sometimes get overlooked.
Marie was extraordinary. She learned to take detailed notes for Louis, helped manage his laboratory, and even assisted with experiments. Their marriage coincided with his early career as a teaching assistant, and she was instrumental in helping him balance his teaching duties with his growing research interests.
You know what strikes me about Pasteur's early years? It seems like everything, his artistic background, his methodical study habits, even his marriage, all contributed to his later scientific work.
Absolutely right, Jack. His artistic precision translated into exceptional observational skills in the laboratory. And those skills would soon be put to the test when he began investigating a problem that was causing major economic concerns in France: the mysterious spoilage of wine and beer.
This is where we start seeing the connection to his most famous work. Before we get into that, though, I'm curious about something. What drove him to take on such challenging scientific problems? Was it pure scientific curiosity, or was there more to it?
That's a profound question. Pasteur was deeply patriotic, and much of his work was motivated by a desire to solve problems affecting France. But there was also a personal element. He and Marie lost 3 of their 5 children to typhoid fever. These tragic losses fueled his determination to understand the nature of disease.
That's heartbreaking, and it really shows how personal tragedy often drives scientific progress.
Yes, and it leads us to one of his most significant contributions. When Napoleon III personally commissioned him to investigate why wine was spoiling and damaging France's wine industry, Pasteur approached it not just as a scientific problem, but as a national duty.
This seems like a perfect transition into discussing pasteurization. Would you say this was the beginning of his most revolutionary work?
Absolutely, Jack. This was truly where Pasteur's methodical approach and keen observation skills came into play. When he began studying the wine problem, most people believed that spoilage was purely a chemical process. But Pasteur suspected there was more to the story.
What exactly was he seeing that others weren't?
Using his microscope, he observed something revolutionary: tiny microorganisms in the spoiled wine that were absent in the good wine. This was groundbreaking because it suggested that living organisms, not just chemical reactions, were responsible for the spoilage.
That must have been an incredible moment of discovery. But finding the problem is one thing, solving it is another. How did he develop the actual process of pasteurization?
Through careful experimentation, he found that heating the wine to just 55 to 60 degrees Celsius was sufficient to kill these harmful microorganisms without affecting the wine's taste. It was brilliant in its simplicity, hot enough to eliminate the problem, but not so hot as to damage the product.
You know what's fascinating about this? He solved a practical problem for the wine industry, but the implications were far bigger, weren't they?
Exactly. This discovery had enormous ripple effects. Once he proved the principle with wine, it was applied to milk and other beverages. Suddenly, there was a way to make these everyday products safe for consumption. The impact on public health was tremendous.
I imagine there must have been some resistance to this new process, though. I mean, heating wine? That must have seemed strange to traditional vintners.
Oh, absolutely. There was significant skepticism initially. Many winemakers were convinced it would ruin their product. But Pasteur was methodical in his approach. He conducted public demonstrations, showing how treated wine remained stable while untreated wine spoiled.
It's interesting how he had to be not just a scientist, but also somewhat of a public relations expert.
That's right. And this ability to convince others would become crucial later when he proposed his most controversial idea, that microorganisms could cause disease. This was the beginning of what we now know as germ theory.
Which was probably an even harder sell than heated wine, I imagine. Before we get into that, though, could you give us a sense of just how significant the economic impact of pasteurization was for France?
The economic impact was enormous, Jack. The French wine industry at the time was worth millions of francs, and it was on the verge of collapse. Pasteur's method quite literally saved it. But more importantly, it demonstrated something revolutionary: that microscopic life forms could be controlled.
And this realization led him to make connections with human disease, didn't it?
Exactly. If microorganisms could spoil wine, Pasteur reasoned, couldn't they also cause disease in living things? This was a radical departure from the prevailing miasma theory of the time, which attributed diseases to bad air or mysterious vapors.
That must have seemed like quite a leap to his contemporaries.
It was revolutionary. Imagine being told that invisible creatures were making you sick rather than bad air or an imbalance of bodily humors. Many doctors were extremely skeptical, even hostile to the idea.
How did he go about proving such a controversial theory?
His breakthrough came with the silkworm disease investigation. French silk production was being devastated by a mysterious illness. Pasteur spent years studying infected silkworms under his microscope, and he identified specific microorganisms associated with the disease.
What I find fascinating is how he kept choosing these practical problems, first wine, then silk. Was this deliberate?
Very much so. Pasteur understood that solving real-world problems would make his theories harder to dismiss. Each success built credibility for his broader ideas about germs and disease.
You mentioned earlier about his personal losses, his children. How did that influence his approach to studying human diseases?
Those losses gave his work an intense urgency. When studying diseases like anthrax in sheep or rabies in dogs, he wasn't just pursuing scientific curiosity. He was driven by the conviction that understanding these diseases could save human lives.
And this eventually led to his work on vaccination, right?
Yes, and this is where all his previous work came together brilliantly. His understanding of microorganisms led him to realize that weakened forms of diseases could provide protection against stronger versions, a principle we now take for granted in modern vaccination.
And his most famous success in this area was with rabies, wasn't it?
Indeed, in 1885, a mother brought 9-year-old Joseph Meister to Pasteur's lab. The boy had been severely bitten by a rabid dog, and at the time, rabies was a death sentence. Despite never having tested his vaccine on humans, Pasteur faced a moral choice: try the vaccine or let the boy die.
That must have been an incredibly tense moment. What happened?
He decided to administer the vaccine, and it worked. Joseph Meister survived and never developed rabies. This success transformed Pasteur from a respected scientist into a global hero. People started coming from all over the world seeking treatment.
Looking back at everything we've discussed, from his artistic beginnings to saving the wine industry, to proving germ theory and developing vaccines, what would you say is Pasteur's most important legacy?
It's not just one discovery. It's how his work fundamentally changed our relationship with the microscopic world. He showed us that invisible organisms could either harm or help us, and more importantly, that we could understand and control them.
And I suppose we're still building on that foundation today?
Absolutely. Every time we pasteurize milk, every vaccination we receive, every time doctors take precautions against infection, we're building on Pasteur's work. He laid the groundwork for modern medicine and microbiology.
It's remarkable how one person's work could have such far-reaching effects. And to think it all started with a tanner's son who liked to draw portraits.
That's what makes his story so inspiring. Pasteur showed that with dedication, careful observation, and the courage to challenge accepted wisdom, one person really can change the world.
Thank you, George, for sharing this fascinating journey through Pasteur's life and work. And thank you all for listening. Until next time, remember that some of humanity's greatest breakthroughs started with simply asking why.